So let's start making some changes to this page. There's not a whole lot that we really have to do. And like I said, if we were going at full speed, this would have been a long, we would have been done with this document for a long time. So forgive my long-windedness. I'm just talking through a lot of navigation and basics and stuff like that. So with this document, as we know, there's no existing tag structure. Nothing came in with this document except the fact that Equidox sees that there is text on this page. And that's why it's drawn these reading zones for us. But by default, all of these reading zones are just set as text zones. So you can see everything in the upper left-hand corner says TX, and everything in the upper right-hand corner has a number indicating the reading order. Now, we need to change our headings on this page. So if you're not familiar with the way that heading structure works, you're basically building an outline of the document for a keyboard-only user to be able to navigate through the tag structure and find a specific section that they're looking for. So just as you would scroll through a document or flip through a document, just visually looking at it, a screen reader user needs to be able to navigate a specific section or subsection within the content. So if I were a screen reader user and I wanted to just read this paragraph, I would be able to navigate through the headings to find that specific section and then read the corresponding information. Without any heading structure, that becomes impossible because they wouldn't know where to begin or where to stop. They would just have to read through everything to eventually hear what they were looking for. And on a simple 2-page document like this, sure, it's not that big of a deal. But what if it's a 500-page textbook and what they're looking for starts on page 451? Well, how are they to find it without heading structure? That's why this is a very critical step in what we're doing. So heading structure is kind of one of the pillars of PDF accessibility. It provides that main navigation tool for a screen reader user. So what we'll do to set our headings is I'm going to click here on this element, which is my heading level 1 for the document. And over here underneath the properties, it says type, and the type is text. So you can hit this drop-down menu and you can scroll down to find heading and change it to a heading. But I actually prefer to use my keyboard shortcuts. So when I want to set a heading level 1, instead of messing around with drop-down menus, I simply tap 1 on my keyboard and it instantly becomes a heading level 1. I can then set these elements as heading level 2s because these are subheadings of this H1. So I'm going to set these as H2s by just tapping 2 on my keyboard. And if I were to then return to the HTML preview, what I'll see is this visual change where I've got much larger fonts for where those headings have been identified. So the reason I like to do my headings first, once I've established my zone detection level, so you set your sensitivity setting on whatever you prefer, the first thing I like to then do is mess around with my headings and try to set those up. Because once you've got your headings identified, it really helps you kind of establish the reading order for the page. Because now when I look at this HTML preview, it's really obvious to me that I have a reading order issue. I never want to see back-to-back headings of the same level. This is technically illogical heading structure. You can have nested heading structure where you have an H1 directly followed by an H2, but you never want to have back-to-back H2s without any content in between. That doesn't make any logical sense. So the problem here is very simple. It's just that Equidox by default is assuming that your document is a 1-column reading order. So it's just reading left to right, top to bottom. So when it gets down here to this bottom half of the page, it sees that this is reading zone 5, this one is 6, then 7, and 8. I can very quickly correct this by simply hitting the drop-down menu, choosing 2 columns, and pressing reorder. And it happens instantly, but now we have 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And if you go back to the preview, what you'll see is that change reflected here in your HTML, where every paragraph is now directly following their corresponding heading. The only other thing to talk about on a page like this, so it's kind of a misconception in the PDF world that all things on all PDF pages must be tagged at all times. It's not exactly true. You can have redundant elements or decorative elements, things that are really just providing a speed bump to a screen reader user. So think of headers or footers or the revision dates, in the bottom margin of a page, these types of things that recur, that are recurring throughout the document are not offering any unique information And just the same as you wouldn't visually read it, your eyes would just kind of glance right past it if it's just like something in the margin. A screen reader user doesn't want to have that read to them on every page. So there is this concept in the PDF world called artifacting, and you can achieve that by simply clicking on a zone and hitting the remove zone button, or just hit backspace on your keyboard. So hitting backspace is the keyboard shortcut to artifact that element. So if I look at the HTML preview now, you'll see that it's no longer included. So the reading order for this page would start with my heading level 1 and then work through the rest of the content. So that's simple enough for like a short document. You know, if you have like recurring elements in the margins, you can just click on them and hit backspace. But what about if we have a situation where, you know, you've got a 200-page document and every single one of those pages has like the chapter title or the revision date or a serial number for office use, like in the margin of the page. You can easily forget to do it across half the pages, and then you've got like a very sort of inconsistent experience for an end user. If you click and drag to just create a new zone and just make it intersect with that area of the page, you can change that zone either through the drop-down menu. You can change it to an ignore zone, or you can hit I on your keyboard, I for ignore. Now, what will happen here is, even though I have a text zone around that content, if I then go and look at the HTML preview, it's still not there. It's not included in the tagged reading order. But the nice thing about the ignore zone is that if I were to move on to the next page, without arriving at this page yet, the ignore zone is already there waiting for me. So it copies itself to all pages in the document so that you can artifact those things kind of just across the board without having to remember to like scroll to the bottom left corner and artifact by hitting backspace that little tiny zone. So it's a nice little trick to have up your sleeve for longer documents. In a real world setting, I would not use it on a 2-page document because I can just as easily click and hit backspace. But a couple of times, it's not really a big deal. But on long documents, it's a nice little trick to have. And it can create a better end user experience by using it because you're not making them read this redundant header across every page. One other thing is down here, we have this page number. Page numbers are actually, you know, redundant in the PDF world. They can actually just cause confusion because this is not like anything other than just a screen reader reading 1. But the screen reader user already knows that they're on the first of 2 pages in the PDF. That's just how the PDF is built. And then this number 1 could actually easily be conflated with this sequence of numbers at the end of this paragraph. So just having a screen reader read 1 out loud is rather confusing because they don't really know what it's in reference to. They would probably be able to figure it out in this very simple document, but rather than like leaving it up to, you know, hoping that they're able to figure it out, in general, I recommend removing them or hitting, you know, backspace to artifact or using that ignore zone trick. But just to show you a different mechanic here on what you can do, if I scroll down a little bit on the left-hand side, there is this area called zone source. And underneath zone source, there are 4 different squares. The main zone source is PDF, and all that means is that whatever is encoded into the document, we just put a tag around it. So that's like, in general, everything is a PDF zone source. What I'm going to do, though, is while I have that zone selected, I can just click on actual. And actual is a way that I can edit what is read by a screen reader when it arrives at this tag. So instead of it just reading 1, I can make it read something like page 1 of 2. So I'm actually adding some additional context to what that element is instead of just, you know, leaving it up to the screen reader user to interpret it. Other ways that you might use actual text, think of like documents that are using a lot of acronyms. Acronyms are kind of the enemy of screen readers because, well, they are just read as words most of the time. So unless like someone is actually using actual text, let's say the acronym is like capital B, capital A, capital T. Well, a screen reader is just going to read BAT. So that blind user might be very confused, like, why is this document suddenly talking about like baseball or flying mammals. It's just like a very confusing that's unclear as to why is like this word constantly being read in this document when it's not really like the topic at all. So what you can do is you can go into actual text and you can phonetically spell out like what that acronym is in reference to. So then you're overriding that tag to say, don't just read the letters BAT as the word bats, but phonetically spell out what does that B stand for? What does that A stand for? What does that T stand for? And at least then, if you do it once, at least, you're like one iteration of it, they can then make that connection to go, oh, okay, like every time I hear the word bat, it's in reference to this acronym. So just like little things like that can make a really big difference for the end user, especially when you extrapolate it over the course of like dozens or hundreds of pages where that one confusing acronym that keeps being brought up, they don't know what it actually is in reference to. So that can make a big difference. Or if you have like non-standard symbols, if you have like, think of like a restaurant menu that uses like like a chili pepper to indicate that a dish is spicy, or a V with a circle around it to indicate that it's a vegan dish. Like that's great if you're sighted, but a screen reader doesn't know what to pronounce or read out loud when it gets across that symbol. So you can phonetically spell those things out so that that blind user has the same experience as they're reading the menu. So just little things like that can go a long way if you come across them. You're not going to have to do this on every document or every page. These are just kind of like the fringe examples, but there are like tricks and mechanics within Equidox to help you overcome them. One other thing about zone source, I can draw a zone that's not even touching anything. And if I call it a custom zone, I can actually add in a custom information about this page. And so there's nothing visually that's going to be altered about the document in any way. It's going to be like a little hidden message for a screen reader user. So think about things that, there's a red arrow pointing at a paragraph to emphasize that it's really important. Well, you can make sure that that's known by like leaving that little hidden message that, hey, the next element on this page is being emphasized by the author. It's got a red arrow pointing at it. You can like add that information in. Or if you have like a flow chart that has, multiple reading orders, you can make sure that you can return to that focal point of the flow chart by using a custom zone and then go down the other alternative reading order of that flow chart. So these are all, again, just like sort of abstract examples, sort of hypothetical situations, but the custom zone source and the actual text, they're really helpful in kind of working around documents where there's things that are being conveyed visually that don't have a text equivalent. So sometimes it's just the location of two things on the page, or the fact that they're color coding things on the page, that they're conveying information through that visual aspect. But a blind user, if they just read the text, they don't have that same experience. So you can enhance the document for them by using that custom zone source. Again, not things that you're going to have to do every day or on every document or on every page, but when you do come across them, these are important techniques to understand. So again, I know I threw a lot of like sort of dense information there at the end at you, but are there any questions about actual text or custom? Okay, great. So we will jump to page 2. And when I jump over here to page 2, what we will see is it's kind of more of the same. So it's a little bit of a review. So I'm just going to tap 2 on my keyboard to set my H2s. And then I get down here and I realize that, my H3, which is a subheading of this H2, is kind of consolidated inside of the same zone as its paragraph that goes with it. So that's kind of annoying. And I probably could have solved this by using the detection slider and giving myself like a better starting point. But I'm also able to just resize a zone and then click and drag to draw a new one. So if you need to make like, very small adjustments like that, you definitely can. You can resize the zone by just clicking in the lower right corner, and you can resize and move them around pretty straightforward. So this is now an H3, so I tap 3 on my keyboard. It's the same problem here. I just resize, tap 4 for my H4, and then draw a new zone. Now, if I go and check out my preview, things look pretty normal. But then suddenly I get down here and I realize like, well, why are my paragraphs at the very bottom of the reading order? The reason this happened is because I already had 12 I already had 12 zones on the page. So when I shrunk this zone down and drew new ones, this became reading zone 13 and this became 14. So my reading order is all messed up. It goes from 8 to 13, back to 9, then 14, then 10, then 11, then 12. I can solve all of this by just hitting the reorder button. And now it's all reordered appropriately, where if I go back to my preview, I can see that all of those paragraphs fall in line with their corresponding heading. But one little final check of this HTML preview, and I realized that, oops, I forgot to set an H4. I never clicked on that heading. It's not showing it up in bold font. So I can get that visual sort of confirmation that that's actually supposed to be an H4. So I tap 4 on my keyboard and it will fix it. If you're curious why I've put Japanese text into this document, like why the sudden change, well, for a simple reason, sometimes you have documents with mixed languages. So whatever the case may be, if you have a document with multiple languages present, we've set the parent language attribute for this document to English because the majority of it is in English. But then suddenly we have a tag that's now in Japanese. Well, of course, an English screen reader cannot read Japanese characters. So what I can do is I can click on this one tag where I suddenly have Japanese present, and I can come over here to the language drop-down menu. So the language drop-down menu, if I just hit J on my keyboard, it'll take me straight to Japanese. And now I can set Japanese as the language attribute for just this one tag. So assuming it's a bilingual person that's reading in both English and Japanese, and they have both languages installed on their screen reader, they'll be able to read all of these characters and have that information relayed to them. So I can save this page and close out of it, and it will bring me back to the document detail page. And now I can see both pages are done. I'm finished.